What's up, everybody? Salam alaikum. Time for Culturally Clueless. We got the 2024 wrap up today, and a few people are here that have been here before. Maria, of course. My God, you become like furniture now. Ray is here. He was here before as well. And Iskander is here. Nada was here before, and Nadia is new as well. So, guys, thanks for being here. Please, not everyone at once.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so
Thanks for having me again.
Okay, so we're gonna go through what we feel are the most important events of 2024, and of course we cannot cover everything, otherwise we would sit here for 8 hours. So we just picked those that we feel matter. And we're gonna start with January, and we're starting with the earthquake that hit Japan in a very, very big way. Starting a new year like this, obviously, yeah. Well, it got worse. It started already bad, but it got worse over the year. So, what do you guys feel about all of these earthquakes? Do you guys believe it's really happens naturally, or is it caused by something or someone?
I think the Earth is just correcting itself. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead, Nadia.
No, it's okay. I think Iskander probably would know better, but we can't negate all of the testing that the US has done in the Pacific Islands. That has to have some sort of impact on like how things move, right? Just like when we boom things above water, that has an impact on the earth. I would imagine it has an impact when we're booming underwater too. But again, that's more his expertise. I don't know if he wants to touch on it, but of course, I think it also happens naturally. So I don't want to negate like what actually has been occurring for thousands of years.
So yeah, to jump on that. So the military is, I believe it's the fourth largest polluter in the world. And don't quote me as to exactly where the military stacks up. US military that is relative to, say, the government of India, government of China, or just the government of the US in general. But amphibious warships require tremendous amounts of fossil fuels, tremendous amount of oil to move and to maintain, as does just aircrafts, to especially fixed wing aircrafts, F-16s, F-15s, drones, all that stuff requires a tremendous amount of fuel. And with that said, that releases quite a bit of CO2 into the atmosphere, and it contributes to the greenhouse effect as we know it. As far as Japan, as average rainfall increases, an earthquake can often be a precursor to a tsunami. And so Japan, being an island nation, is particularly prone to earthquakes. This isn't the first one they've had. They had another one that was rather horrific back in 2011. I don't have the exact stats memorized as to how that one stacks up to the one at the beginning of this year. But there is no question that the U.S. military definitely does pollute. I know that the Marine Corps specifically wants to forego amphibious warships because they're gigantic, slow-moving wastes of money, and they also happen to be very disastrous for the environment. And they're not really being used for very much good. I mean, they're being used, for example, right now to bomb Yemen off the Gulf of Aden. So, yeah, not much to celebrate there, admittedly. And anyway, with that being said, Japan is one nation that is at least indirectly paying the price for that. Some in Japan might argue that they want the protection from China, but there's a cost. So do I think it's fair to entirely blame the US for that? No. But is the US really helping the problem? Also no, because earthquakes are in part being they've occurred long before. There've been earthquakes for hundreds of years, right? However, the frequency of them, as we know, has certainly increased over the last century, and that's in large part because of industrialization, the production of more fossil fuels, et cetera. So I'm not an environmental scientist by trade, but I have, as a political scientist, studied geological catastrophes and the effects of climate, certainly on politics and on development. And then having joined the Marine Corps and been in now for almost 5 years, even at my level, I've still learned, they teach us about this, just how much fraud, waste, and abuse there is in the military, specifically and like to point fingers at the Navy and the Air Force because they're the biggest polluters. But anyway, rather than getting into like interbranch rivalry, the point is, yeah, Japan is certainly one nation among many that pays a price. Puerto Rico is another one that periodically will get hit with hurricanes, and it's just seen as the cost of doing business. Essentially, island nations tend to have this issue, unfortunately.
Wow. Can
Tucker,
I
I looked up
just
the numbers for you. It says here that the number of deaths in the 2011 Japan earthquake in Japan is 19,759. So it's
Yeah, it's
pretty high
bad.
up there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I just have on a side note, Iskander, have you ever, so for those people, which is most of this audience here, they don't know you, like this is not like your TikTok audience or so. You know everything. It seems. So have you ever tested your IQ?
Please don't tell him
Definitely.
that.
No,
Have you?
I'm definitely not the smartest person on this panel. That's for one. And then two, I've never had like a formal IQ test, so I don't really know where I'm at, to be honest.
You know, the other day we were talking about about the smartest guys in this community. Maria, if you recall, do not mention the names that we said because we don't want to be offensive in case anyone sees this. But let me tell you, he was one of them,
No,
if
I'm
not even
honored.
the first to be mentioned.
Well,
So,
I
okay.
appreciate that.
What's next? What's next? What do we have next? Do we have, okay, yeah, we have BRICS. So these BRICS thing has been going on for a while. Now we have our favorite countries joining. Iran, UAE, who else joined? Saudi Arabia,
Egypt,
of course,
Ethiopia.
Egypt, and Ethiopia. Okay, Ethiopia is cool, I guess. We can like them.
Yeah, that was an interesting add-in. Like, I wouldn't, if I were just to hear about it randomly, I wouldn't have guessed Ethiopia, and that's just out of pure ignorance, right? Um, but yeah, it's interesting to see how this is gonna play out. I
Mm.
don't know, because the last time someone tried to make a different monetary system was the Libyan president tried to make like the African
Yes,
central bank backed by
yes.
gold and saw how that went. So I'm just gonna like play it by ear. I'm a wait and see kind of person, but it seems promising, but also seems like something that the US would have interest in crushing immediately.
I don't know. I mean, Ethiopia is not actually far-fetched when you think of the situation that's going on. And, you know, when you think of exploitation, when you think of everything, everything that the UAE and Saudi Arabia are part of, I feel like is not a good thing. So,
Oh
I
yeah, for
agree.
sure. Strategically, once you like think about it,
yeah.
right? UAE is already very active in Sudan, and that's a neighboring country, and it kind of gets into that Horn of Africa. So it's very strategic. I was just saying, like on its face, it's just not something that immediately came up to me. But I totally agree with you on that.
Mhm.
And sorry, whoever I cut off. Go ahead.
Oh, we can
Oh
cut each
no.
other off. It happens with
Yeah.
too
I
many
was just
people.
saying I agree. I was just saying I agree. And whomever just said that anything that the UAE or Saudi Arabia is involved in usually isn't good, that's the part that I was like, I totally agree with that.
Hmm.
And, not only is the UAE involved in Sudan, but they're also involved in the Congo. And we all know what's happening in the DRC, and um, just their involvement, I think, is obviously contributing to the genocide that's happening there.
So now that I know that we are familiar with what's going on, but maybe some people really don't know what's happening in the Congo. I don't know if you want to like touch on it briefly, just so everyone knows, or like people that may watch this get a little bit of a summary of what's going on.
You're not asking the right person, man. I mean, the only thing I know, I've attended a couple of lives on TikTok, and I was
Hmm.
part of a group where we were obviously collecting money for funds. But what I know is obviously what's happening in Gaza isn't just it's not unique. It's unfortunately, it's happening in other parts of the world, and Congo is one of them. So what I know is that currently there's millions of people in Congolese people that are being displaced, and there's a genocide that is happening in Congo, and it's all around. From what I'm understanding, is just the natural resources.
Mhm.
And you have your armed militias that are basically inflicting some of this on their own people because of the incentives, right? They're incentivized to do it, just like what's happening in Haiti, right? So you have Western meddling in these countries, and they go in and they basically arm some of the civilians, and they say, okay, in order for us to get what we want, we need you guys to do ABC. Like, I don't need to spell it out, but right, from we're talking from rape to murder to trafficking to whatever, in order to basically further the Western agenda. So Congo is not unique to this, unfortunately. But from 1990, I believe, until now, I believe the number is about 20 million Congolese that have been displaced. I think it's probably 3 or 4 million that have been murdered.
It's more seven.
So yeah,
I'm not
I'm
sure.
sorry,
I think it's more 7 million that have been
seven
murdered,
seven
but
million.
I'm
Yeah,
not too sure.
yeah.
But we also need to say that the militia groups come from also neighboring countries like Rwanda, for example, and then Congo, unfortunately, has always been under fire from King Leopold.
Mhm.
Um, we talked about it actually here in this podcast before, but for those who don't know, the King Leopold did very, very bad when it comes to Congo, like bringing people over, completely exploiting it, and everything else that Nada just explained.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually that's a good point for us to kind of touch base on. I was one of the lives that I was on, Pape Orion is someone on TikTok, and he holds lives and he holds fundraisers for the people of Congo. And one time they were talking about how during King Leopold's time, they would obviously bring these kids that are 4 years old, 5 years old, and they will make them work the fields or whatever, right? Like make them do labor. And if they can't, if they're not able to, then they'll cut off their limbs. So they'll cut off their arms and their
Yes.
hands and their feet. And then what they would do at one point in Europe, they were making, in Belgium, they were making molds that look like hands and feet and just limbs, basically chocolate molds. And they would sell them in Belgium. So like you can just go buy, how like we buy like a bar of, chocolate over there, it would be shaped like they glamorized it. They glorified these horrific acts, but there are tons of pictures that you can just Google and you'll see children missing limbs. So what we see in Gaza now because of the bombings that are happening from Israel, that actually happened in the Congo during King Leopold. But of course, they would just cut off their arms if they can't carry something. It's the maiming of children it has been going on for centuries, but the Congo has definitely experienced the worst of it, I would say.
And to be honest, so they still have the Congolese Museum, and it's an African museum where they still have these people are like, okay, so I'm sorry, but white people are really weird. They brought over crocodile snakes, butterflies, everything you can imagine that, like spiders, everything, right? And it's still like they preserved it and they exhibition it, so you can go there and actually see that. And at that same spot they used to have a zoo for Black people, so where like Belgium used to go and just watch Black people, throw bananas at them and all kind of stuff. And honestly they did that even in the 50s, where they went and brought over a bunch of people from Congo to actually, exhibition them or whatever you want to call it, for people to come and see. So it's actually really disgusting. And if anyone is ever in Belgium, you should go and see these things because they really have these boats. And that's one of the most painful things to see, actually, how tiny these boats are and how many people they put on these little boats. I don't even know how they made it over the water.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible what human beings do to each other.
Yeah.
I just
Okay.
like, before we move on to February, just because it came up, it's obviously happened later in the year, but I do want to shout out that there is a lawsuit. Um, the Congolese essentially are suing Apple for their involvement or their negligent involvement whatever you want to. I'm sure they're suing for both intentional as well. I just haven't had a chance to look at the pleadings yet, but they are suing Apple for their
Yes.
unfair or their exploitation and using child labor to get the minerals or resources that they use to make like their products. So that's something that just because we were talking about Congo, I wanted to mention, but again, I need to look into it more. I haven't had a chance. And then in January of this year, there was actually a case filed in Israel. So the survivors of the Nova Festival, they're filing a lawsuit against the IDF, the Israeli Security Forces, which is like their police, and also the private security of that festival. And they're claiming that they were negligent in protecting the people that were attending this festival. I'm only interested in the case because I feel that could uncover some things that have been hidden. So when they, if it goes to trial, right, they might try to bury it. So I've been trying to watch it as much as I can, but we know news and stuff out of Israel, it's hard to get. I haven't seen any updates since January, and that's like it was literally filed January 1st / the 2nd, depending on where you are in the world. Um, and it would be very interesting to see what facts come out, how much the government actually knew. We already have like an inkling that they had intelligence, right, about the attack that was going to happen. So we're going to potentially find out how much they knew and how badly they failed to protect. And maybe that's going to give us some insight into how they really didn't want to have an excuse to do what they're doing in Gaza. So that's just something that I've been trying to watch and look out for, but I know it's really hard to get information out of Israel at all, let alone a lawsuit like this. So the fact that I even came across that there were filings was like a win for myself. Um, and I'm going to try my best to continue looking into it. Just some background. I'm a nerd, so I'm always looking at lawsuits and things going on. So here and there, I might add in my 2 cents about things going on in the legal world that touches on what's going on. We see some of the effects like in the reality, but we didn't know that started with a lawsuit.
Yeah, this is interesting. That's definitely pay attention to it. I don't know if they're gonna bury that case since there is no update, but let's see. Maybe they're just gonna prolong it like everything else. Who wants to talk about the tunnels? Because that's something that happened. Are we in February? We're in February, right?
Before we move on to February,
that's a good segue. So how about the tunnels?
Yeah, no, Nada, I think you wanted to say something, right?
yeah. So before we move on to February, two things that happened in January that are kind of related. One of them is pretty unprecedented, right? January 11th, South Africa, they presented their oral arguments against Israel at the ICJ. So that was that's no one expected this. And obviously, it's still going right now. And then on January 26th, the ICJ indicated 6 provisional measures against Israel to prevent acts of genocide. So that's also a really big deal because obviously, we all have seen every time something is taken to the United Nations, it's automatically vetoed. There are no sanctions against Israel. So this is quite a big deal for it to happen in January.
Yeah, for sure. Just to clarify, because I hear a lot of people say that, and this is pure propaganda and laziness on their end when they say the ICJ ruled there's no G side or genocide. Sorry, TikTok words. No genocide. That is actually not what was at all what happened. That hearing was a preliminary hearing. It was an emergency hearing. So South Africa had filed their lawsuit alleging genocide in Gaza, and then they asked for like an emergency hearing, as Nada said, to have provisional emergency they call it injunctive relief, but like stops, like you have to do XYZ, stop doing XYZ. And almost every single judge, it was either 11 or 10 out of 12 judges voted for each one besides one of the requests. And the one request that they didn't vote for was just because they said it wasn't like ripe at this moment. It wasn't a true emergency, that at the next hearing they could discuss it. in more detail once they get like more reports out. So it was a um, very favorable decision for South Africa. Israel argued that South Africa doesn't have standing, that the court doesn't have jurisdiction over Israel. Actually, every time they argue something, they spend the bulk of their argument on jurisdiction because they don't have any other argument. Um, and the court overwhelmingly, 10 out of 12 said, no, we do have jurisdiction over this. South Africa does have standing. And then the other argument Israel had was saying um, that there's no credible evidence or there's not enough to go forward on this case. You should throw it out. There's not enough to even consider whether there's a genocide or not. And again, 10 out of 12 judges specifically said, no, there is enough to go forward. So some people will play on that saying, oh, they didn't make a decision that there's a genocide. That's because it's ongoing. This was just at the beginning. So it hasn't been decided yet, but it has been decided that there possibly is one, and we need to hear this evidence out.
Well, by now the arrest warrants are issued, also to Hamas members, but obviously 2 of them are not here anymore. May they rest in peace.
They suspect the third one's not alive either, so.
They say that, but it wasn't confirmed, was it? Does anyone know? Ray, Iskander, anyone?
It hasn't been confirmed, but suspected.
You see, like, the guy is just like totally not getting involved in this conversation. That's very different.
My bad. I took it a little bit nerd to legal, so that's probably
no. It's you're fine. I don't know. So
maybe they want to talk about the tunnels. That's why they're saying.
No, I mean, I'm just waiting to be called on, right? It's not my panel. I'm here as a guest.
Oh, no.
Right,
we just talk here, okay? We just talk. This is like, as long as we don't yell at each other, we're good. I think everyone is respectful enough to wait until someone else finishes, or if you accidentally interrupt someone, doesn't matter. We just
well, what I would add is that regardless of what the International Criminal Court says, the reality of the situation, we were just talking about the Congo, for example, King Leopold, many in the West don't know that, well, I don't really want, I was told not to call him by people I've met, but from the Congo, they say don't call him King Leopold, because King implies that there's a certain level of authority that he has, or that he's worthy of some kind of prestige. But Leopold II was essentially the latter-day version of Hitler, because he killed at least 13 million Congolese people. Of course, the exact number has never really been determined. There were so many people killed to the point where no one can maintain an accurate figure. And everything that Nadia was saying earlier regarding chopped off hands, limbs missing, there are pictures of that. It's very well documented. And it's exactly how many people that suffered from that. Again, no one really knows. There were also thousands of instances of rape as well, and arbitrary detention and torture. So, and that occurred for at least 40 years, longer than that even, up through World War I. Many Congolese people fought for the Belgians in both World Wars, actually, fighting for an empire that literally hated them. And then after World War II, in the era of decolonization, people of the Congo wanted to break away from the West. And even though Patrice Lumumba was not an ardent communist, it didn't matter. The CIA still accused him of being a communist. And when they found out that Che Guevara had, after Cuba, fled to the Congo to try to essentially incite a second coming of the Cuban Revolution, they engineered a coup to kill Patrice Lumumba and bring a murderous dictator named Mobutu to power, who was a very violent, nasty dictator. And keep in mind, too, the Congo, something that I think often is lost in the mindset that many of us who are raised in the West is, or those of us who just aren't from sub-Saharan Africa, is we forget just how multi-ethnic the Congo truly is. There are so many different ethnic groups and hundreds of different languages spoken. If you look at Nigeria, the largest country in Africa by population, I forget, it's like over 120 freaking languages are spoken. There's some insane number, and it's like nobody speaks every single language in Nigeria. And these borders were drawn arbitrarily, namely during the scramble for Africa. So you get one ethnic group that a Western power will come and privilege and it's usually like 1% of the population that they'll privilege over everybody else. They'll give them the weaponry and even the ability to hire foreign mercenaries to fight for them. So you essentially have a foreign power that intervenes and puts in place a dictatorship that, in exchange for the weapons, will funnel resources. So going back to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the Emirates and the Saudis have oil. The US wants the oil. The Emirates and the Saudis want the money. They follow a very strict Wahhabi Salafi school of thought that is, for example, virulently anti-Shia. So ever since the Iranian Revolution, they haven't given a damn about the Palestinians. They care much more about countering Iran's influence, and they'll work with anybody to accomplish that objective. Which is funny. They don't want war with Iran. They'll play nice with Iran when there's discussions of any sort of invasion of Iran because they don't want war, but they still hate them and want to counter their influence and isolate them in the Middle East, in the world. So, but anyway, but the point is, going back to the Congo, the U.S. Did this. They instituted a coup, and then for the next 30 some years, up until the end of the Cold War, Mobutu was in power, and when the Rwandan genocide was ongoing, the Israelis, according to Amnesty International, were funneling weapons to the Hutu extremists that carried out the genocide. Rwanda was colonized. They recruited Tutsi policemen who were a minority to govern the Hutus. And then after the decolonization, the idea was, okay, now the Hutu extremists wanted revenge on the Tutsis and took it out on them. And now we're seeing the opposite of that. We're seeing the Rwandans governed by the Tutsis saying, well, we want payback because when Hutu extremists were massacring and genociding us, they were getting refuge in the Congo under Mobutu, who was supported heavily by the West. And with that being said, Western companies that they don't really care as long as they continue to get their lithium, their opium, or whatever resource it is. I know specifically there's diamonds and lithium in the Congo that Western companies want. Tech companies in particular really want the lithium, and they don't really care how they get it. They didn't care if it came to, for example, occupying Afghanistan. I mean, part of that, of course, huge part of that was the opium, but they also wanted the lithium. And so, anyway, that's the way it always is. It's Smedley Butler. I talk about it all the time. Smedley Butler wars a racket, and that's what guides foreign policy decisions. It's about which companies are benefiting from this. Apart from, of course, the defense industry, there's oil, there's tech, or in the case of Israel, there's religious extremism. Evangelicals, for example, that want to support Israel so that they get their blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus back. And so there's that too. That's kind of unique to Israel's case, but that's what guides these foreign policy decisions. That's what leads these atrocities. And so regarding the decision by the International Criminal Court, even though Amnesty International and 90% of the world can see the situation for what it is, unfortunately, the world is in a state of anarchy. And so the decision might come down that it is genocide, but who's going to enforce that court order?
Well, let's see. Let's see. We hope so. Definitely. I think by now it's literally like those who don't see it are those who don't want to see it or don't want to admit it. So the tunnels. Some people's favorite topic. I don't know why. I really don't know. Who wants to explain what happened so we can move on, because we have a good few points to get to.
Are we talking about the Brooklyn tunnels?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't live in Brooklyn, so I don't have to see you.
I don't think any one of us lives in Brooklyn.
Yeah, what was going on there? I mean, all I know is I woke up and everything, it felt like the ship blew up. And I was just like, what is going on in Brooklyn? Because, they spent, I don't even know how many months saying, the tunnels in Gaza, the tunnels in Gaza. And then now we have rabbis coming out of tunnels in New York. And I was just like, okay. And I think what made it really funny is that I think it was a Reddit post where this guy that lives in New York, and he was basically saying that he kept on hearing things under his apartment. He lived he knew that he lived in a basement apartment, and he was like, I know I'm not going crazy. I'm hearing things underground. And he was like doing all this inspection, all this stuff. And it turns out that those tunnels were built directly under his apartment, and he was hearing them doing their whatever. And it was just, I think it's hilarious. I don't know. Some people may think it's shameful of them. At this point, to me, gutters, like they're infested with rats. And I'm sorry, but these Zionists, like, that's where they deserve to be. So That's my opinion as a Palestinian.
So, Ray, can you tell us how does news hit Australia? Like, does it arrive on time?
No, they arrive before you guys hear them, because we live in the future.
That's true. That's
Please tell me how my day is going to be tomorrow, please.
Yeah, well, not while we're recording. After recording, we can say that.
okay.
Yeah, no, we received the news on time. But the thing is, sometimes because of the location of Australia, we don't really find these news immediately unless they are going viral, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, basically, I heard about the news of the tunnel basically through social media. Of course, through TikTok, and everyone was talking about it at that time. Then I did some research or reading about them, and knew the what was happening. At least, the purpose, or what they said the purpose was, as like let's say an unauthorized expansion of the synagogue itself into some further blocks of buildings, and the damage that was caused to the buildings, like Nadia said about the person who was living there in a nearby location. Basically, they did a lot of. In fact, it's one thing. The first thing is that it is an illegal thing, which is unauthorized expansion, unauthorized construction. Let's call it this way. The other thing is, they haven't really done it the right way, which is even the worrying part. Again, I'm just talking from a construction point of view.
The right way.
So they haven't done it exactly.
Yo, what is the right way?
It was all messy. It wasn't authorized by the city or whoever grants the permits. It may have been authorized by the people that run the synagogue itself. Just to be clear, they're in on it. I found it to be very disturbing how these individuals were attacking the police that came to investigate, and there was not one unaliving, when we know if that was another community, how they would have been treated if they tried to stop the police from entering. Just putting it out there. It was quite disturbing for me to see that in my face when they say, oh, if he was unalived because he didn't cooperate with the police. Oh, really?
I think he meant the construction work.
No, I know. No, I know. But I was just saying, bye. Sorry. I knew what he meant. Sorry. But I was thinking what was disturbing to me was seeing how the police reacted and how they reacted to the police and the lack of reaction, if you know what I mean.
Well,
and then the images we saw, the dirty beds. I'm just all disturbed by this story, in all honesty. I never got over it.
I mean, it is very disturbing.
Well, there's the other part. Okay, it's about the legal thing. When they were arrested, and how those 5 men who were arrested, and how the lawyers made an exit to them, as they are Israeli citizens studying to further become rabbis or something, and all 5 men pleaded not guilty and were released without bail. It seems like this is a ticket out.
Yeah, that's actually so interesting because like on my mind, if Israel's like the place where Jewish people should go, why would they come to America to study? Shouldn't they be going over there to study? I don't know if that makes sense. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's because if you're an Israeli citizen and you seek not asylum, but if you go to Israel, they don't extradite you. That's part of their law. As long as you're an Israeli citizen, they will not extradite you, even to the U.S.
I don't
Exactly.
know.
Yeah, that was a. Mhm.
No, what did you want to say?
No, I was just saying that's a significant thing. It's like it's explicit display of, they always have the ticket out. It was so easy for the lawyers to give it that ticket.
Oh,
For
they
me,
know they've been doing it.
I mean, for me, the most interesting
Hmm.
part is that over the year, there have been, especially in New York, so many other more cases of trafficking by the same group of people, and not necessarily rabbis, but again, by the same group of people. So,
I think when
uh,
there are no consequences for actions, right? When we're talking about human trafficking or we're talking about a genocide, we're talking about money laundering or fraud or whatever it is, right? When there's no consequences for a people, then there is no incentive for them to stop, whatever it is the crime is. There's a show called Trafficked, and it's a little bit of an older show. And season 1, episode 1, and I believe it's on Netflix, literally talks about money scams and stuff like that. And season 1, episode 1, one of the countries that is mentioned is Israel. And they talk about how they have defrauded hundreds of thousands of Americans out of billions of dollars, not millions, billions of dollars. And they set up basically like fake investments, and they target the elderly, they target people that don't necessarily know a lot about investments. And there's an entire kind of area in Tel Aviv. It's called Ramat Gan, and it's kind of like the Diamond District. And they basically have hundreds and hundreds of buildings filled with these fake investors. And so it's just like, if there's no consequences for these people, no matter what the crime is, then there's just no incentive to stop at this point. So even though we know this fact and it's on a show and it's been confirmed, what is the consequence? There is none, right? They're still going to find a way to defraud the average American out of their, hard-earned money, basically. And then on another scale, we're seeing the trafficking of children. We're seeing, these sex compounds, right? We're seeing the genocide that's happening in Gaza. So there's just no incentive for them to stop. There are no consequences. It's just not going to happen.
yeah, 100%. So, the next point is one of my favorite politicians until someone proves me wrong. Please don't ever prove me wrong, because I really like this guy. And that is Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, and he calls himself the coolest dictator in the world. I'm sure that Maria can actually say some stuff because she likes him as much as I do, if not even more.
I love him. I don't like him. I
Right?
love him.
Me
Why do you
too.
guys love
So
him?
because he's a.
And this,
Did you know he's Palestinian?
I
he
mean,
has
I'm just
Palestine.
asking you guys. I mean, you say you love him, but I want to know why.
Oh wait, we
Yeah,
don't love him
he's
because he's Palestinian, but there's different reasons, obviously.
yeah.
Yeah.
Nadia Bukele is a Palestinian descended president of El Salvador, and this man changed the country in less than a year. For people that are not familiar with El Salvador, they were under decades of war on gangs, when these people were massacred day after day for gangs. By the way, gangs that receive weapons from the United States. This man, this very young man, took her career politics very serious, but with a truly mind change policies that was for the people. Everything that he did, every policy was to protect the people, and that made him very popular. To finally he gained the presidency, and in less than 1 year, he changed everything. He cleaned the country of all these gangs. He created one of the most securest prisons in the world, because and it's for sure the most secure prison in America, but I'm not afraid to say in the world, because if you researchers the prison in El Salvador, you will see the field security, and the most important thing that he doesn't treat everybody as one criminal. They had levels, right? If this person was accused to kill someone, they're gonna have the mayor sentence, and they're gonna be sentenced different than lower level crimes. And these low level crimes are not just put in a cell. They make them work. They making it a profession. They make them serve the country. So this man changed the mentality of how to treat prisoners and how to run a country clean of corruption. He created, and Salvador is a third world country. It has the best hospital to treat COVID, and it was built in less than a year as well. So this man is the embodiment of a good leader.
Okay,
And because of that,
what else did he do? He did something else good with the money.
you told me, what else did he do?
The
I think you're talking about the Bitcoin law.
yeah,
the Bitcoin, yeah.
Cryptocurrency, yeah. Mhm.
Among other things. So yeah. And because he was a true leader, he was elected, he was the first president elected for a second term since 1944. On a lie escape, 95% of the people voting for him. So this is for on many other reasons. He's my favorite politician of
Ever.
all time.
Ray, can you explain the Bitcoin law? Do you know about it? What he did?
Well, look, I don't really have that much of a background, but basically he legalized the Bitcoin, unlike all other governments, and he allowed basically it became legal to deal and trade with them. Also, he actually issued bonds. The bonds could be bought and exchanged with Bitcoin, which allowed, of course, the public and whoever wants to participate in that, to how to say it, to refresh the economy. As simple as that.
Did you
But
know he was
again, honestly
Palestinian?
speaking, I don't. Well, I knew it lately.
Okay.
Mhm.
Iskander,
Yes,
do
I
you
knew it
know?
lately.
Yeah, I did. A lot of people think that my regional specialty is Middle East, and it's actually not. It's Latin America, and I do
Oh
happen
my
to
God,
have a
this guy.
professional working fluency or professional working proficiency. If you, I wouldn't call myself fluent per se in Spanish, but I'm very confident in my ability to speak it. And yeah, I have read up quite a bit on Bukele and his
But
his
wait.
reforms in El Salvador.
Before you go there, is there anything negative that you want to tell us about him? Because if so, then don't say it.
Well, I mean, it depends on who you ask. Some people might like, for example, an authoritarian leader. Some might not.
Oh, we do.
Amnesty, yeah. Well, if you like authoritarianism, then it's fine, I guess. Then I guess it's not bad to you, but people who maybe are more libertarian minded might find it bad. But anyway, Amnesty International has criticized him for what they deem arbitrary detentions and mass arrests. And the idea is that, there's some innocent people that you capture and you crush the cartels and the gangs in El Salvador, because El Salvador, like much of Central America, has long been plagued by cartel violence. And so Bukele's come along and he's forcibly cracking down on that. So he might call it proactive policing, where if you just deem somebody to be a criminal, if you don't have a warrant for their arrest or have any real tangible evidence, you might just get some cops who, after so many years on the beat, they'll just know, oh, it's like seeing a certain dog down the street, knowing what breed it is. I'll say, oh, I know this guy. It's a prankster. I know this guy is a rapist. I know this guy is whatever. Just by looking at them, some old beat cops will argue that, at least in the U.S. context. Same is likely true in El Salvador. So as the president, he just gives them the authority to arrest whoever they think might be a criminal. Person may not be, but there's oftentimes no trials. These people are then thrown in prison and they're incarcerated. And by having a very strong police presence and by encouraging the militarization of the police and this obedience to the state, this obedience to law and order, that's how he is attempting to rid El Salvador of its crime. But there are, of course, some negative externalities to that Amnesty International is criticizing. So, but it depends. I mean, some people in El Salvador love him, others might not. So I'm not gonna, take an opinion on that one way or another. It's their country; let them govern it how they wish.
100%. Okay, so now there is your next. Wait. Nada, so you didn't know that he was Palestinian?
No, I didn't know. I mean, I don't remember ever hearing that he was, but now I do. So I'm going to do some research on him.
Absolutely. Nadia, did you know?
Yeah, I actually did know, but I wasn't sure like how much. I just knew like of Palestinian descent.
His parents are full-blown
Yeah.
Palestinians. Yeah.
I mean, not to be one of those people, as soon as I saw the name, I was like, ooh, what's this? Yeah, I grew up like that. My dad always would be like, did you know so and so's Lebanese? And then when I'd be like, how does he know? And he's like, didn't you read their names? So now I'm always looking at names.
Yeah.
His
Okay.
paternal grandparents immigrated from, I think it was Bethlehem. Don't quote me on the exact
Yes.
place. It was Bethlehem. Okay, so yeah, it was from Bethlehem. It was, I think, even before, actually long before the Nakba even.
Yes, it
I
was a
believe
little
it
bit
was,
before. Mhm.
yeah, it was, I think, going back to the interwar period, actually, 1921, I believe, when they first came to El Salvador. And anyway, then his parents were born there. Sorry, his father at least was born there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I don't know about his mother's side of the family. I just know that his
Mother is
well,
something else. She's I don't know if she's Maria, what is she? Is she El Salvadorian?
Salvadorian, yes.
yeah,
Okay. Okay, well, that's a great segue. What you guys mentioned in Lebanon, or Lebanese. Let's not move too far away from that because we're going to talk about the attacks that happened. Israel launching attacks, missile attacks, in February in retaliation. Let's do this a little bit differently. Did anyone expect the situation to go down the way it went down in Lebanon after October 7th? Or was this a
I
surprise to
wasn't
anyone?
expecting like the pager situation. That was something new. Um, but did I expect Israel to attack? Of course, Israel doesn't have defined borders to this day. They've always been an expansionist state. And even before um, they officially became a state, when they went to different conferences in France, they were asking France to have their borders at least up to the Litani River, which is in Lebanon. So they always wanted to expand. And if they're going to keep getting money given to them without any repercussions, why not take this opportunity, right? So, yeah, I kind of saw this coming, unfortunately. Um, just some of the tactics, maybe not so much. And yeah, it's a little close to home.
Was anyone
So,
else surprised?
yeah.
No
wouldn't
one.
say I was surprised per se. I mean, I knew certainly after October 7th, I knew that there was going to be that Hezbollah was going to retaliate. That they were not going to just stay and going to sit there silent because their own political survival in Lebanon is heavily dependent upon
Yeah.
how much they stand up and fight for the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Because Hezbollah has been controversial in Lebanon essentially since its inception, namely for its ties to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, otherwise known as the IRGC, and for its loyalty to the Assad regime. Although that was tested at one point in the later stages of the Lebanese civil war during the War of the Camps, where Assad was going through and he was killing Palestinians. And anyway, then uh, roughly the division was you have the Amal militia, which was a Shia militia that preceded Hezbollah. It was founded and led by Musa al-Sadr, who was ostensibly killed by Gaddafi in 1980. And then when Israel invaded 1982, after the Iranian Revolution, the Hezbollah formed, the Party of God in English, formed, and it was there to fight the Israeli occupation. That was its main goal because the Israelis were at the time blowing up broad sections of the Shia community in Shia communities in South Lebanon. The Amal militia had largely sided with Assad and wanted to kick the Palestinians out, but Hezbollah said no, we should help the Palestinians fight the Israelis, and this became a point of contention. And it gets complicated because Hezbollah's early leadership, to include Hassan Nasrallah, were all originally part of the Amal militia. And so, as Assad was going through Lebanon, Part of that, of course, was he had his own interests. He wanted to take over the country and make it part of his greater Syria projects. Um, he also had his own dispute with Israel over the Golan Heights, but he of course hated the Phalange in Lebanon too, to include the Suj Gemayel, Samir Jaja, who's somehow still alive, and those guys. But anyway, he also had his own hatred of Yasser Arafat that goes back to even before he became the president in a bloody coup in 1970. So anyway, what ended up happening was there was conflict between those two, and but then from 1990 all the way up until just recently, Hezbollah was in fact very supportive of Assad because he was the conduit by which weapons would reach South Lebanon to help Hezbollah fight the Israelis, and so that was their main reason for helping him. But there were, of course, some negative externalities to that because Hezbollah or Assad had a very negative reputation throughout most of Lebanon. Mm-hmm. Because Lebanon, like going too deep into the history and wasting everyone's time, Lebanon is it's a heavily impoverished nation. About 3/4 of the country is in poverty. There's some places in Lebanon, certainly towards the border with Syria, are often without running water or electricity. A lot of roads are damaged. There's a tremendous issue with hyperinflation. It's very difficult to attract any foreign investment to help drive up local business, because the country's constantly getting hit. So who's going to want to invest money in a place that's constantly getting hits? Those of us in the West don't really understand just how lucky we are. The U.S. has really only been hit twice in its history, at least since the 1900 onwards, right? There was Pearl Harbor and 9/11. It's about it. That pales in comparison to just how much land was destroyed in Lebanon. Like Lebanon's had at least 80% of its country destroyed multiple times over the last 50 years alone. Imagine if that were the case here in the US, right? So, and so with that being said, with such little resources, Assad came in, controlled everything, and said, "No, I run the place now. And if you criticize me, I will kill you, and there'll be no consequences." And so this is, in a nutshell, why there was so much controversy surrounding his occupation of Lebanon, which lasted from 1976 all the way up until 2005. And so, with that being the case, because Hezbollah defended him and was against his removal in 2005, many Lebanese people hated Hezbollah. But in 2006, when Hezbollah fought the Israelis and when Israel launched thousands of missiles in Lebanon and destroyed most of Beirut and destroyed most of the south and essentially wrecked, a country that was reeling from decades of occupation, Hezbollah was the only entity that was really able to resist that. The Lebanese army relies heavily on the U.S. It has historically for its weapons, but the U.S. doesn't want Lebanon to fight Israel because the U.S. wants to protect Israel.
Yeah.
So Hezbollah was the only entity. It's basically the unofficial Lebanese army. They fought the Israelis, and Hassan Nasrallah was seen as a hero essentially for that, and as well as for resisting the Israeli occupation from 82 up until 2000, when Ehud Barak withdrew ground forces and essentially. And that's also true in the South Lebanese army, which was a bunch of phalangists in the south. When they collapsed and tucked their tails between their legs and fled into Lebanon, where a lot of their children, they're actually Lebanese Christians that serve in the IDF. So, but anyway, hopefully that's some context. I don't mean to take up too much time. I just like to throw that out there because a lot of Lebanese people I talk to don't know this either, which is kind of surprising. But anyway.
Well, since we're talking about Lebanon, we might as well Hassan Nasrallah, that was another thing that happened. Let's go through it real quick. He was taken out by Israel. Is there anything else that we need to mention about Lebanon on a whole? Anyone? Anything that happened this year, of course?
I think probably the most significant thing is that Lebanon can permit third party or foreign journalists to come in, and that's not the case with Gaza. So a lot of the same justifications that Israel employed on why they were doing what I call intentional targeting of civilians, what they would call collateral damage, the same excuses that they used for and the same tactics that they used in Gaza, they used in Lebanon. But because we were able to actually have third-party investigators and journalists in without having the Israeli government stopping them, we were able to see with our own eyes and actually on our own media but Israel's been lying. We already know this, don't get it twisted, but like for a lot of the outside world, they're seeing, oh, they called this hospital a command center, and there's not one shred of evidence to show that there was any military activity going on in this hospital. So I think that's really significant. We also have more technological warfare with Israel. So they're literally doing things like they said, oh, we do the leaflets, we tell you guys to leave. So this is like another really good example in Lebanon, telling 2 million people to leave the South on a one-way road, essentially. Like it's very difficult, but once they get out, then you get text warnings to other people throughout Lebanon saying, if you host any of these people that are leaving the South, we will bomb your house. So we have these threats. And then we actually have as far up north as Tripoli, where there are safe zones or like refugee camps for people that fled the South, actually getting bombed. So what was the point of giving these leaflets, right? To me, it just kind of evidences or shows what Israel's intent the whole time was, to clear out certain regions, unalive or kill the people, murder the people that would go back so that they could build their settlements. And that's actually something that happened recently. They put their first outpost in southern Lebanon, and I say outpost because that's the word Israel uses to pretend that it's temporary and it's a military necessity for a short time. But the ICJ actually talked about it in one of their decisions. Just because you call it an outpost doesn't make it an outpost, and it's actually a tool that Israel uses to annex more land.
Well, we just reached March. We need to speed it up a touch a little bit. So let's fly over some points. We do know that it's the UN said that 56% of the Palestinians that were killed were women and children, and not Hamas members, since everyone is apparently a terrorist. Is there anything that, and there's a lot, but is there anything in particular that we want to bring up that happened in Gaza or the West End in 2024, except too many arrests of Palestinians for no reason, whether it's in the West Bank or in Gaza? And if anyone has anything like specifically that we want to bring up, we obviously know about, the destruction of schools and hospitals. Like, is there any particular event that anyone wants to mention?
I think a lot of people are not, either they're just not aware, or maybe they just don't like to talk about how the Palestinian Authority plays into all of this. Because right now everyone's focus is on Israel and what Israel is doing. But for me, I mean, I have people that live in Nazareth, and just the stories that I hear about, I do have also people that live in Jerusalem, but how the Palestinian Authority has been able to, I wouldn't say stop the resistance in Jenin, but they have definitely hindered their progress. They're working with the Israeli police, and they're arresting I guess we can call them the resistance fighters there. So the Palestinian Authority is, at fault just as much as Israel is. And treason is something that the Palestinians have been dealing with since the beginning of time. I mean, even during the Nakba, the reason why it was able to happen, not only that, Palestine did not have a military, right? But we're talking about just, armed civilians. Most of them were armed by the British, and they were treacherous to their own people, and they were promised, like they were promised land, they were promised something. And so we really need to focus on not only the Israeli regime and the occupation, but also from within. We have the Palestinian Authority and their involvement in basically taking down the resistance fighter, especially in the Jenin camp. To me, that pisses me off more than anything that because it's your own people, right? Like, you don't need enemies when these are the people that you're basically breaking bread with. And it's just, that's a tumor that needs to be cut out. And if there has to be something done, absolutely.
I agree with you, 100%, 1000%. That needs to go first before we actually focus on occupation.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know, but Abbas, he was the right-hand man for Arafat. A lot of people don't know this, and
Oh, really?
so,
They don't know?
It
oh
was,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, and he was actually responsible for all of the finances of Fatah. So he had the money. So whenever it was just, to me, it was like just looking at all the information, it was a shoo-in for Israel, for him to be the leader of Fatah at the time, or just for him to take over after Arafat was killed or died or whatever it was. Because one, he had the finances. Two, he knew everything that Fatah was working on. And then three, he was purchased, right? Like it's easy to buy him. And he wanted the power, and he's a millionaire, and he'll just basically obey Israel under the guise of, we want peace and solidarity with the Israeli people, but not understanding that he's literally selling his own people to the highest bidder. Well, at this
Oh,
case, it would be the lowest bidder, would be Israel.
Yep, 100%, 1000%, whatever. It's definitely like that. But okay, so the next point we have is friends. Abortion being part of their constitution now, and it's really interesting because America is quite the opposite. How do you guys feel about that?
I mean, it
Well,
doesn't impact me
yeah.
personally, but I don't know about the
Of course
guys.
not. Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't believe you said that. Okay.
I'm just saying, it's a joke.
Okay.
You guys are so serious.
No,
I
it's all
mean,
good.
bottom line up front, abortion is one of those, I guess you can call it a necessary evil if you like to call it that. But I mean, the reality is, if you make it illegal, it still happens under the table. It just happens. This is what way it was before Roe v. Wade in the US in 1973, I think that was when the Supreme Court decided that. And abortions still happen under the table. You make it legal. You go to Planned Parenthood to get it done. Um, on a deeply personal, spiritual level, I, for example, have little nieces and nephews, love them to pieces. My cousin, for example, didn't abort her kids. But at the same time, it's like raising a kid is very difficult. It's usually in poverty you get abortions. So France is taking a pragmatic approach. And they're saying, well, it needs to be legal. So if you make it illegal, which is what the US in large parts is trying to do, namely in the Deep South. I spent a lot of time in the Deep South. My mom used to live in Alabama. I lived in Virginia and North Carolina for almost 3 years. It's like there's still parts of the US that are extremely like very religious, like the same parts that tend to be very pro-Zionist, pro-Israel tend to also be super opposed to abortion. There's a connection there. I don't know. But I bet they probably agree with aborting Palestinian children. They probably make an exception
Oh my
for
God.
them. But but in general, if it's like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child, oh no, can't do that. So anyway, but yeah. So
This is opening a whole different conversation which needs to be had, but honestly,
anyway,
that's a whole podcast, right? Actually,
France
about
is more
the
progressive than the US, and
yeah,
this is one side of that. So, which is odd. I can't believe I'm saying that because and I'm sure Nadia would agree as a fellow Lebanese American, don't have too many nice things to say about France, but when you see them on the right side of history on anything, it's like watching hell freeze over, but I'll take it.
Okay. So sticking with friends for a second, they've been kicked out of, I think, 6 countries in Africa, which I think is huge. So it is Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, um, Senegal, Chad. What's the 6th country? Iskander, you probably know, or anyone else.
You
Or
were
maybe,
mentioning, cakes.
huh?
6 countries. You said, wait, hold on. You said
Uh,
France because the prompt reads France is kick 6 African country.
is kicked out of 6 African countries.
Oh,
You see.
geez, I don't have them all memorized off the top of my head. I mean, I'm thinking you said what? Senegal was one,
Yes, Chad,
right?
Burkina
Chad,
Faso,
Burkina Faso,
Mali, Niger, but one is missing.
Niger, Cote d'Ivoire, maybe
No. They're
on the
still
Ivory Coast,
no. They're still
Madagascar.
no. I don't think
No,
they're there yet. No. I don't
I want
remember
to say
what the.
Algeria, but I feel like that was a long time
Oh,
ago.
you know what? No. This was Algeria. That was actually the number 6
Oh,
because Algeria
Um,
also they have a visa now.
I
If
think
you're like not, if you're French or whatever, you cannot just come in like that anymore.
I think that was Mauritania.
As well.
Yeah,
I
that sounds
think
right.
so. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's cool. Okay, and then we're moving on to Damascus. We're in April now, and the Iranian embassy was hit. Some of the officials were killed, some other people. It was done by the occupation, of course. Mm, yeah. How do you guys feel about that? Why is it that they take out like let's say wars, and this doesn't happen just there, it happens in many other uh, cases as well. Why do people take out their battles on a different people's country?
I mean, from a military perspective, you have the smartest guy on the panel, Iskander, and I'm just giving him shit because I can, and he gives it right back sometimes. But that's from a military perspective. From a civilian perspective, I would say one, because they can, and two, because they want to drag the US into it. Three, because they can. And that's just kind of Israel to me is just kind of like a petulant child that kicks and screams and does all this stuff. And whenever people are trying to like calm them down, they get worse and they call mommy and daddy, and they keep getting funded. And that's just kind of like, this is in layman's terms, right? Like this is just trying to make it as it's a simple analogy. Um, and there's just there are no consequences. So once they start being held accountable for what they do and the pain that they inflict on other countries and other people, then it's going to shift. And right now, and I'm bouncing around a little bit with the ICC arrest warrants that came out. I think I'm not going to say that it's 100% going to change everything, but has never happened to Israel, and so they may consider changing some of their tactics. But that's what I have there.
Yeah.
I would say, aside from Putin, the West in general, right? Israel's considered like a Western country. So any, this is like a huge thing for Western leaders at all to be uh, prosecuted potentially by the ICC. But I would, in my opinion, I think the ICJ rulings are more important than the ICC because ICC is like on an individual level. So it's like individual governmental leaders, whereas the ICJ focuses more on like the country and what they're doing. And I know Iskander hit on it a little bit. Who's going to enforce it? I think it's just happens to be like the foundation, and it gives other countries like support to stand on when they decide, like, for example, Spain, you're no longer going to use our ports if you're going to transfer weapons. So that's the significance of these decisions. Sorry to like take it off topic like that. Um, but yeah, that's just my opinion on the ICJ being a little bit more important in my mind than the ICC, but it's still very huge, right? Especially in context saying that other than Putin, Western leaders are very rarely taken to the ICC. And that's why, in my opinion, the US is probably freaking out.
Okay. Crazy. So then what is next? So we have a lot of attacks by Israel. We have a lot of, the settlers doing crazy things, whether it's in the West Bank or whether it's even later on in Syria. Any particular attack we need to mention
There have been
done
so
by
many.
Israel?
There have been so many of them, to be honest with you. It's hard to keep. We don't have enough time in a day to go through every
Right?
single one, which I hate saying that because it seems like you're just kind of glossing over all the atrocities and all of the children that have suffered, and all of the women that have been sexually assaulted, and all the children who've been detained who are still rotting away in Israeli prisons. I mean, there have been so many. It's like you just kind of, after a while, you get kind of, at least from my point of view, and following this for a living, you get essentially
Yeah.
numb. Just kind of watching like the dead Palestinian children piling up in the slums of Gaza and much of the West Bank, and it's, yeah, I mean, it almost like it blurs together when it probably shouldn't. Like you just lose track of all the different names because there are just so many of them every single day that you keep seeing again and again and again, right? So, and I don't like to give blanket statements or any broad sweeping statements about like any, because like every single life that's lost deserves to have, the story told, right? Every child, every man, every woman, every boy, girl, etc., needs to have their story told in full. And so you try to focus on
Like
the
the main
trends,
ones.
right? Instead of looking at each individual case, you try to, at least for the sake of time, focus on what the most significant and horrific atrocities were, generally determined by the number of casualties, and go from there. So, like the Flower Massacre, for example, was a pretty big one. Um, Certainly horrific and involved a lot of children suffering. And yeah, I mean, the reality is specifically not to backtrack to the Iranian embassy attack, but the point is the Israelis know they couldn't put boots on the ground in Tehran themselves. They would get absolutely destroyed. The United States, and this is a pill, I talk about this periodically. Lieutenant General Paul Van Riper in the Millennium War Game Challenge of 2002, he played Iran in that war game when the Pentagon at one point did consider invading Iran. And bottom line up front, Lieutenant General Van Riper kicked the crap out of the Pentagon so severely to the point where the Pentagon rigged the game against him to make him lose, and that he went public and said, "Hey, this is BS. Like I kicked your asses. You need to swallow that pill." And so he essentially forced the Pentagon to come to grips with the reality that invasion of Iran would be very tedious and challenging because Iran is very mountainous. It's much bigger than Iraq was in terms of their population. And if anything might unify people around the IRGC, it would be an invasion, an unwanted foreign invasion of the country. So,
Yeah.
with that being said, the Israelis, just like they wanted the US to invade Iraq, Benjamin Netanyahu was on record as the finance minister back in 2002 saying he didn't use WMDs. He specifically said nuclear weapons. He went before the US Congress. He has nukes. He has nukes. He's a threat not just to the Jewish state. He is a threat to the world. And so, same rhetoric that going back now over 10 years, he draws a cartoon image of a bomb at the UN, and he has like a little line, and he goes, if Iran acquires a nuclear weapon, they are a threat, not just the Jewish people and the Jewish state, they are a threat to the world. And he's just like frothing at the mouth. He wants the US to invade Iran so badly because he knows that he'd get destroyed if he did it. So all Israel can do is these little airstrikes or a covert terrorist attack and blow something up, like an embassy or a school or a mosque or something like that. That's all they're able to do. They can't do anything else, and they know it. So they want the US to invade Iran for them. And when it comes to these attacks on settlers, or the attacks from the settlers, it often in collaboration with the PA and the West Bank, helping them do it. Or when it comes to them killing activists, or even attacking protesters within, like people who have Israeli citizenship who are quote unquote Israeli. A lot of them are getting arrested, and you notice that I'm forgetting there's a group of Jewish people that were historically exempt from conscription who are now forcibly being conscripted, and they're resisting that conscription. So now they're getting attacked. And so you're seeing a lot of internal unrest even within Israel itself. And so they're only going to become more dependent upon Western support to help them. And I know these through my own inside channels that nobody is keen on fighting for the Zionist entity and actually putting boots on the ground to help them. So every time they do these acts, right, there's the strategic level of war that I talk about, like a broken record, where everything that they're doing is not being done in a microscope. Yeah. The whole world is watching, right? Social media has revolutionized the world, and the impact of social media on warfare really hasn't been very studied all that thoroughly. We have mountains of history regarding the history of warfare. We don't have very much regarding strategic studies. And since that, how the actions in Israel are affecting the world, that is in the making, right? As we speak, academics around the world are taking note. So, with that being said, with every life that is being lost in Gaza or in the West Bank or in South Lebanon or wherever a Palestinian is being killed, it is being recorded, it is being noted, and the voices of these Palestinians are being amplified like they've never been amplified before, certainly in the West, but also elsewhere around the world, throughout the global South, right? Yeah. So, that's, at least for the sake of time, what I can say. So
because you guys have the list, obviously, I'm just gonna jump over some points because we just really, really barely have any time left. Let's talk about Mexico voting the first female president into power, Claudia Sheinbaum. Well, she made some positive comments about ceasefire and Palestine, but do we know anything important that we need to mention or?
Friends of mine in Mexico are skeptical of her because they view populism as kind of like a bunch of false goods, but like, it sounds great, but it's not
Yeah.
actually great, that it starts tilting towards authoritarianism. You criticize the ruling party, you get attacked. There's that conspiracy. And they say, oh, there was this tunnel system that her party totally didn't repair, funds that they misplaced. That's
I thought
their
so.
entire shtick is, we're not as bad as the right wing, therefore vote for us. And don't you criticize us, you're one of them. Like, there's a lot of either or politicking that goes on. Um, it's to be determined as to exactly what happens with Claudia Sheinbaum's presidency. Certainly can't be any worse than some of the clowns that that Mexico's had in the past in terms of their presidents. Some that, for example, had ties to cartels and so on. Don't think that'll be the case with her per se. And I think it's also fair to say too that no politician's ever perfect. As an outsider looking in, I thought, oh look, they've got a female president. She's of Jewish descent. Like, okay, it sounds cool, right? I mean,
Who
I'm not one
cares?
for identity politics, but I was like, it doesn't seem like a problem on its own. But it's her policies, right? It's her history. How is she going to act? And it seems like people in Mexico, some were happy, but there are also a lot of very skeptical, very negative opinions of her as well.
I'm sorry, you need to
So
come away. We
yeah.
need to come away from this whole thing of, oh my God, a female president. Oh my God, a person of a black or brown person and as president. This we have been seeing that it doesn't do anything. We need to stop getting excited over these things. It doesn't mean nothing.
A professor said it best, Ness. She said, black and brown faces and high spaces will not save us. And I just absolutely love that phrase.
That is very true. Okay, we're in June. We need to also talk about Julian Assange, of course, the founder of WikiLeaks. He was imprisoned in the UK for a very long time, very bad conditions. There was a crazy story. Just to make it very short, it's he basically published some papers, some governmental papers telling on what happened in Iraq or Afghanistan in 2003. And I'm sure, Iskander, you know so much about it, but unfortunately, we really don't have the time for it. What can we say that anything about this plea deal that he took in the end, and he then left the UK, he testified, and then he went back to Australia, where he's originally from. Do we need to mention anything? Does anyone have anything important? Okay.
The only thing that I can add is the importance of free press.
Yes.
That's I'm sorry I had to go back to Gaza, but our journalists in Gaza has been targeted because of this.
Yes.
Because they open the eyes of the world. And it's important that we protect these people because we know what we know because of that. Regardless if we like or not the news, it's important to know the whole news. And I want to dedicate this part to our journalists in Gaza. You guys are a hero. And we are what we are. We know what we know because of you.
Almost 200 have been killed by now. Okay, we're moving on to July. We have the former president of Iran. No, yeah, he was actually, see, we didn't even mention that part. He was killed in a helicopter crash, and this was kind of like weird. And then in July, the new guy, Masoud Pezeshkian, or whatever you want to, however you call him, he took over. So does anyone have any information about anything that actually happened? Because it went completely quiet about this helicopter crash. They said it was an accident, and that's it.
Yeah, all we know is that, well, at least what they've announced is that it was due to weather. There was fog and rain and stuff like that, and that's what caused it to go down. Um, conspiracy theory that my family has is it was downed on purpose. Masoud is he's more liberal, obviously. And if you really think about it, everything that had happened after this person became president, I feel like to me, I feel like it was Iran basically um, giving up intel. Because right after that, Hania was killed, Senwar was killed, Nasrallah was killed. Obviously, the fall of Syria, and putting Assad aside, right? Like regardless of how people feel about him, there are people that love him, there are people that hate him, there are people that whatever, right? But just like Syria right now, the state of Syria, um, is troubling to me. I'm Palestinian Syrian, so it's like I see this and I'm just like, okay,
You are? You never
I
told
am
me.
my grandmother on my dad's side is
Huh?
Syrian, 100%. So I am 75% Palestinian, 25% um 25%
Syria.
Syrian. And I lived in Syria. I lived in Damascus, and Iskander knows this. But regardless of what people feel about Assad, I think the situation in Syria right now is quite dangerous. And I think, right, like because you have Turkey wanting to grab it, Israel wanting to grab it, like, right. So right now you have all this stuff happening. But going back to this president's death, right, it's untimely. But then all of a sudden, all these things started to happen. And I personally, like, there's zero evidence to corroborate this. But to me, it's just really suspicious. And all of a sudden, you have all of the leaders from the resistance, and then just one after another. Something is up, and only time will tell, honestly.
Interesting take. Anyone has any take on this?
Iskander, come on, you have
Yeah.
to say something, man.
No, I do. Like I said, just for the sake of time, I don't want to drown anybody else out. For example, I know Ray hasn't spoken in a while, so I always try to be mindful of space. But yeah, regarding Syria specifically, so yeah, on the Syrian point, a lot of people don't know this, but the Maluhi name originally does come from Syria, the Syrian Christian community. So how do I phrase this? So there's my mother, and there's my grandmother, Antoine Maluhi. Everyone knows her from Sindibad because she was the voice of Sindibad. Her parents, um, there was my great grandmother, Antoinette Deeb, who my grandmother was named after, and then her biological father, Antoine Maluhis. So this would be my great grandfather. Never met him. My mom never met him. He abandoned my great grandmother years ago, and my grandmother was a little girl. And so anyway, that's where the Maluhi name came from. He was Syrian. My great grandmother was born in Tripoli, Lebanon, back when the mandate was still in place. So there wasn't really much of a border between Lebanon and Syria. The line was very blurred between the two. It certainly is now, but was much more even back then when they were both under the same mandate. So people could travel back and forth depending upon wherever the work was. And so my grandmother was actually born in Syria herself, and technically was half Syrian, so to speak. But if you called her Syrian, she'd get pissed. And so,
Wow.
but anyway, but yeah, she was raised through most of her life in Lebanon, and my mother was born and raised in Beirut. So I don't really call myself Syrian, but technically there is Syrian DNA in me somewhere. But yeah, as far as the situation with the collapse of Syria, yeah, like Assad, hate Assad, say whatever you will about the guy. The reality is, if we look at history, recent history at that, Gaddafi gets bombed up by the U.S. in 2011. What happens? ISIS surges throughout the country and stages all sorts of chaos. Saddam Hussein gets taken down. Al Qaeda surges throughout Iraq, causes all sorts of chaos. You have the U.S. bombing the crap out of everything. You've got the Kurds and the Shias fighting each other. It was a huge mess. And sure enough, right, you take out the dictator, in this case, Assad. Okay, you remove him, you bomb him out. So now the Alawite minority, the Shia minority, they went from being in power to now they're out of power. And then you've got Kurds, you've got Syrian Sunnis, Syrian Christians, Syrian Druzes, you've got the Israelis, you've got the Turks moving in, and they're all fighting for something different. So without going too deep, we'd have to have a whole separate panel on Syria to dissect the history and the politics. But the bottom line is that you've got currently, as it stands right now, on December 29th of 2024, You have the Turks out to kill the Kurds. You have the Israelis out to bomb out any weapons that they think could end up going to Hezbollah. They're bombing that out. You've got Jelani, who has a history of being part of Al Qaeda, who is now poised to take over the country. And anecdotally, I've met some Syrians who they love him, they defend him, they apologize for whatever history he had with Al Qaeda, and they act like it's okay to be, to have a history of being with Al Qaeda. And I even had one in particular who's like, well, you work for the military. You work for the military. Who are you to call it terrorism? I'm like, well, we didn't do 9/11, so there's that. And, we don't, for example, sex traffic women and get you in a lot of trouble in the military, whereas Jelani did it and, or was part of it at least, and you're totally okay with that. And anyway, he claims to be a moderate and he claims, oh, I'm not going to persecute the Shias and I'm not going to, I want to include the Kurds in the government. He's acting a moderate now. But there's one thing that Al Qaeda is consistent on. They never attack Israel, just like ISIS almost never, ever attacked with anything to hurt Israel, which is very convenient because as much as they might claim to hate Israel, right, like Osama bin Laden, even, right, the founder of Al Qaeda, he wrote in his letter to America, you're pillaging and raping Muslim lands in Palestine. But did he ever do anything to actually help the Palestinians? Did he ever give them weapons? Did he ever fight Israel? No, he never did. Because as much as he claimed to hate Zionists, he hated Shia Muslims even more. And this is why Al Qaeda in 2007 was attacking Lebanon. They were attacking Hezbollah specifically. And they were trying to recruit Al Qaeda. So they were trying to recruit maybe from the Lebanese Sunni population fighters to fight for them. And Hezbollah and Lebanese army had to fight them. And so, with that being the case, they might claim, like I said, to hate Zionists, whatever. But Jelani, again, he picks his battles. It seems like he is still, at the time of this recording, poised to side with the Israelis over the Shias in the south of Lebanon. And that's the way Al Qaeda has always been. That's the way they all are. They hate Shias more than anything in the world. I've seen this where friends of mine who are Shias from the south will have these people scream at them. As much as I hate they'll sit there and say, oh, you worship Imam Hussein, you disrespect the Sunnah, you disrespect Sister Aisha. As much as I hate the Zionists, I'll still take them over you. Like they'll scream at the top of the lungs to these people. And it's just like, what in the anti-Shia hate is that? But that's where their priorities lie. And so Naim Qassem, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, has even said about a week ago now that their supply line has been disrupted. Assad was their supply line, their conduit. So now, with the so-called ceasefire in effect, which I knew was a sham from the start, Hezbollah already threatened retaliation after repeated Israeli strikes on the south, despite the alleged ceasefire agreement. So Hezbollah wants to retaliate, but now it's going to be harder for them to do that if their supply line has been disrupted and if Jelani decides to enforce that ceasefire. If, let's say, you have private actors, it may not be government sponsored anymore by the Syrian government, but let's say you have private actors from, let's say the Shia militias in Iraq that are moving through Syria and they're trying to ship weapons to the south. If Jelani starts to attack those weapon caches, then he is at that point doing the bidding of the Israelis. And it's unclear as to how he's going to react to that. But so far, the signs are not very positive in that direction. And there seem to be some people who are okay with that. They might still, oh yeah, free Palestine, but Syria first. And I got some trouble for saying this, but it's like, hey, I'm like personally, because of my own family's history with Assad, I'm like, all right, great that you got rid of him, but let's not forget about Palestine because the reality is the Palestinians still need our help. And this is part of the problem in the Middle East, in my opinion, is we're too quick to turn on each other and to get caught up in our own feudal beefs and forget, hey, there are people still less fortunate than we are. Like, Syria, okay, you got rid of Assad, but the Palestinians are still very, very far away from freedom. So
well,
let's not forget that.
You guys made very great points, but I don't want to gloss over the fact that, Ray, maybe can you please talk on how important it is for the people of Syria that Assad has finally fallen?
Yeah. Look, the thing is, sorry, it's been a while since I spoke. The thing is, okay, if Assad had fallen in 2011 when the people revolted, wouldn't we see the same happening? Israel would be attacking and, trying to destroy military bases or all the whatever the military equipment that are available. I would say they would be. If, Assad had been there for Assad family had been there for 54 years, right? And at any time, at any point within the 54 years, what attacks, or let's say what wars had been happening between the Assad and Israel, except in 1973, which we all know the story about it. And, you know, they declared, the Syrian forces at that time, they were told to pull back because they were defeated. That's what they were told. Well, they couldn't really see any Israeli forces at that time progressing. But anyway, my opinion is, you know, in 2011, people went to the streets and they protested against the Assad regime. And we all know why. We are seeing now what was happening in the prisons. We can see now what happened. Look, I appreciate everyone here who mentioned, you know, their ties or their relations or their family members who are in Syria. I am from Syria, okay? And I have experienced everything except, look, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't experience the torture, but I experienced even the interrogation, which was anyway devastating, okay? Just because I visited Jordan and, you know, stayed there for a month and came back. And I had all the proofs. What was I doing in Jordan? I was just getting my grandfather getting treated there, and we brought him back, you know, to be buried basically in Syria. So he passed away in Jordan, and so I've got everything with me, okay. But still, I couldn't really avoid 6 hours of interrogation in the worst places ever there, which is the security branch of Palestine. It was called the security branch of Palestine, which was the scariest one. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is, yes, I'm talking about myself now and so many others like me. Do I trust the factions who participated now in the liberation? No, I don't. Do I trust their direction, or who are they funded by? Of course I don't, right? But the Syrian people, they revolted in 2011. The Free Syrian Army itself, it was made out of militants who defected from the regular army, right? But of course, the number of them wasn't really that much. But what they tried to do is to protect the civilians. You could see, you know, the Syrian channels, the TV channels. They had this dedicated TV show that is called the Media Misinformation. And of course, they're always attacking, you know, the other media channels or the other, you know, news channels like Al Jazeera and the like, and saying that, you know, these people who are the protesters themselves, they are supported by Israel. And they were showing some evidences at the, you know, like at some random area, some random neighborhood. They are showing Israeli flags that they were lifted during that protest, which is far from truth. It was all made up. Okay, there was some in 2011. There was also an interview, not an interview. It's like it was a talk show on BBC talking about the Syrian revolution, and they had multiple people who were participating there. And you know, BBC, of course, they were sneaky enough. They brought some spokesman from Israel, and there was also the spokesman on behalf of the Syrian people, or from the Syrian side. It was one famous author. Her name was Rima Flihan. She's actually from the Druze. She is a Durzi. Okay, and during that interview, the Israeli spokesperson said, "We do support," and that was sneaky. He said, "We do support the Syrians with their revolution. We give them all the support." And at that time, Rima Flihan, that's on BBC. Rima Flihan told him, "Okay, I need you to stop. We didn't ask for your support. We're not looking for your support. Okay, you are our enemy." Right? So it seems like it was a sneaky move by the BBC to do that. All right, and it was pretty much confirming what the official Syrian TV channels, what they were doing, what they were showing. Right. So what I'm trying to say here is, again, Assad family, they always said that, yes, we are one of the forefronts of the resistance. We are the supporters of Palestine. We are. But what did they do? All we could hear all the time, this news that we just came across now, the Israeli air raid onto the Iranian embassy. Okay, like, can you imagine, this government or this regime with all the sovereignty, with everything, and all the speeches, the top speeches that they are giving. Okay, Israel air planes, they are just flying to the middle of the city of Damascus. They just bomb a building, kill whoever's there, okay, and fly back. They fly to the Damascus airport. How many times over this year, during this year, how many times the Damascus airport and the Aleppo airport were put out of service? And you know what? Okay, fine. I'll forget about the Damascus airport because Damascus is in the south of Syria and it's close to the borders of Israel. But flying all the way to Aleppo airport, which is far north, without even, I'm not going to say the Syrian air defenses. I'm going to say without even any Syrian militant using a slingshot shooting at those airplanes. And you'll see Syrian officials, what they are saying. They are saying that we will respond in the day and the date and the time, and the proper day and time. Like, okay, they have been saying that for how many years? Did anyone respond? No. So again, what I'm trying to say is, if those rebels, or those who call themselves rebels, those factions, if they were not the ones who took over and managed to get the Assad regime to fall, and let's say you choose any factions from any background, and if they did it, okay, we're not talking about Qaeda, we're not talking about ISIS, we're not talking about any of those ones, all right? Let's say independent rebels, independent factions, they just managed to do it, okay? Don't you think that Israel would do exactly the same like they are doing now? I would say yes, they would, okay? Because if you look through the history, you'll find out that, I'm sorry, the Syrian regime, the Assad family, they were guardians for Israel. And as soon as they fell, Israel would progress and would immediately destroy exactly what they are doing now. Would destroy all the military bases, whatever the military power or ability, they would try to destroy it so that it will not fall under the wrong hands, because they were with the right hands before. That's my opinion here. I'm sorry, someone could everyone can disagree with me, but again, this is what I saw. This is what I lived in Syria, and I lived for a long time, long enough to see what they've done, what the Syrian regime was doing to the people, was doing to the Palestinians themselves, okay, and what it was doing to Israel, how they were helping Israel.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I heard you say that the Assad family was basically, specifically the Assad family, right? They were helping Israel. What evidence do you have? Like, what do you know about that? Because this is the first time I've ever heard anything like this. So I would like to know what your opinion is, and then where you're getting this, so I can do further research.
That's what what I was saying is, first, the example of every airstrike, every Israeli airstrike to every location in Syria, all across Syria, okay, all around Syria. They went to the northeastern area, and they bombed a building that is supposed to be something like a nuclear reactor under construction, right? And the Syrian air defenses, they never did anything, okay? Again, not a single bullet was shot from the Syrian side since 1973, from the Syrian side, from the Syrian regime, from the Syrian army, okay? Not a single bullet was shot towards Israel. While Israel is just going in and out as if they have no problems. If you're asking me for proofs, the proof is what I've seen. Honestly, I don't have sources to show. Okay, look, in 2011, there had been some documents, and there had been some papers that were leaked. I can find them for you, and I can send them for you. I'm more than happy to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'll be great.
Yeah, absolutely. It was always about allowing or giving permission through the borders between, the Golan, between Syria and Israel, okay, there are permission that is something, they used to call it something, and it used to be happening between Syria and Lebanon as well. If, they want someone to pass without really any security check or without any permit, they would give him something like, it's called a military mission, under a military mission. There had been so many permits that were issued earlier for some names that are for people from Syria to go through Golan and back as well. And as we all know, there's the United Nations. They've got this that line between Syria and Golan since 1973 or 1974 with the agreement that happened back then. Okay, so there shouldn't be any interaction, but there are so many of those permissions that were happening throughout the year for some representatives to pass through those borders. That's all I can provide, and I can actually find them again and provide them to you, because I used to have them in 2011, but that was back then before I came to Australia. So I can find them for you, and I'm happy to send them to you. Okay.
How long did you live in Syria? Because you have an Australian accent, so just curious.
I lived in Syria 21 years. So I was born there, I studied there, I finished my college there, and then I moved out. I didn't move out, I didn't come to Australia. I spent another 16 years in a country that is nearby. I'm not going to mention the name. A country nearby, an Arabic country as well. Mm-hmm. I've witnessed the Syrian revolution. Mm-hmm. I've seen it. I took my parents, like, it was a miracle that I took my parents out of Syria, out of the city of Homs, mm-hmm. which was destroyed. You can just search it in Google and see how it's destroyed, similar mm-hmm. to Gaza.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, I've been in Australia for only 9 years. Only 9 years.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
Well, I'm
Before
glad
that,
you
I was
and your
always
family
close to
are
that
safe.
area. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's do 3 quick ones and then we have to really go. So Marcellus Williams, innocent guy, was executed, death penalty, in September in Missouri, although there is so much evidence that he didn't commit the crime, he didn't commit the murder that he was accused of. What do we have?
Go ahead, Iskander.
I was just going to say, yeah, real quick, I've always been opposed to capital punishments, and historically in the United States, it has disproportionately been applied to African Americans. That's just a fact. That's not something that can really be disputed. And so, very unfortunate to see Mr. Williams be brutally executed by the state, but unfortunately, it happened. And, well, I mean, with that being the case, certainly it was a video that it was his son that made it, talking about, what his father's message should be, the legacy, the take-home point from all this. It still continues to happen. I mean, I've always been, like I said, very opposed to capital punishment. Pretty much always will be. And I say this as the son of a police officer myself, so my old man was a beat cop for almost 30 years. And it was actually my mom who convinced my dad to be against capital punishment. It doesn't reduce crime. We've got pretty extensive information regarding that. And again, and specifically in this case, in the state of Missouri, very shameful miscarriage of justice by the state of Missouri. And it's unfortunate because I know that Missouri can do better. One of my best friends, fellow Marine Corps buddy of mine, he lives in St. Louis with his wife, very much was opposed to this too. And he represents many very angry Missouri leftists who are appalled by this decision, the fact that in 2024 this still continues to happen, right? So, and he was innocent too of all the charges. It was unfortunately, it took a very, not just politically motivated, but racially motivated hits, if you will.
Nadia,
I just want to add one more thing about the Marcel William, the penalty. A lot of people will move letters, reach out to the presidency, to the White House to stop this, and they did nothing. But
Yeah.
President Biden, I think last week, they removed 37 prisoners for death penalty.
That's the
So he
point.
had a power. He could have saved this man and refused to do it. I just want to add that.
Yeah, that is a very important point. I wanted to ask Nadia, is there going to be any repercussions for this now, like legally?
Not that I'm aware of, because it was within their scope, within their power to make that decision. So they didn't do anything. He had his day in court. Unfortunately, it came out the wrong way. There could be like civil liabilities. Civil court has like a lower standard, and you could sue for like loss of life. Um, but he didn't have a job. He's not losing wages. It's gonna basically just be like a wrongful death, unfortunately. But the one thing I wanted to really speak about on this particular topic um, was that it was more than just evidence that he did not commit the crime, that he was innocent. It actually came with the prosecution saying that this should not happen, and the family of the victim saying they do not want to see someone that's not responsible for that crime be held to this punishment, to be taken away by capital punishment. So it was even worse than just saying, oh, there was credible evidence that he was innocent. There were things that usually don't happen. Usually prosecution doesn't want to admit they got it wrong.
Yeah.
And they came out and said to the judge, no, we don't think this should go forward. And then like a little bit on what Maria was saying, it was in the governor's hand, but that's not to say that the president couldn't step in. So to her point, yeah, obviously Biden just did something, so he could have, or maybe he could have used his political power to, speak with the governor and get something done. But yeah, other than that, the only repercussion really would be in civil court.
Wow. So before we get
Oh,
to
Nez, I was going to add one more thing to this.
sure.
And I won't take too much time. So, Mike Parson is the governor of Missouri, and even though he refused to pardon Marcellus Williams, I do want to remind everyone that on December 20th, he basically overturned, or he commuted the sentence of I think his name is Volcanair, and he's the cop that killed a black man in his home, in his driveway.
Yeah.
So he commuted that sentence, even though he's a convicted murderer, and the evidence says it all. But Mike Parson decided that Marcellus Williams isn't worth saving, and this points out that we have systemic racism here. This is white supremacy at its best right here.
100%. It's when people say that there's not racist laws, the implementation could still be racist. So I just appreciate Nada for bringing that up. That is 100% right.
Okay, before we get to the election, and close up with that, we do have Diddy.
Oh, God. Diddy. No Diddy. That's the no Diddy.
I don't know what to tell you. Like, I mean, so okay, actually, let me tell you guys a personal story. I'm gonna tell you a personal story. Maybe I don't know, maybe this will be interesting. So in 2004, long time ago, I worked at a specific company in Houston, and we were I'll just say I worked for Shell Oil, and we had a customer service department, and I was the trainer over that customer service department. One of the agents, he was a little bit younger. He was in a band, like those boy bands that were like in the early 2000s, like everyone wanted to be in a boy band. So he was in a boy band. And at that time, I think he was Puff Daddy. Was he Puff Daddy at that time? I don't even know.
I think so.
But yeah, so do you guys remember his show that he had on, I think it was either MTV or
MTV,
BET?
Making the Band.
Making the Band.
Making the Band.
Of course,
yes.
I know that show.
Yes, that one. So he and his little boy band friends, this is the guy that used to work for Shell, they actually went and auditioned. There were four of them. And they're good. Like they can sing, they can dance, whatever. And the four guys did not make it, but one guy made it.
Mhm.
And he basically told the rest of the guys, you guys are lucky that you guys were not selected because you
100%.
definitely have to, it's kind of like hazing and getting into a fraternity, but on a whole other level. He didn't tell me the details, but he just said his mother, the guy that I used to work with, his mom, she was like, I'm so grateful that you did not get into that because, there's rumors, but then his friend actually came out because he eventually did not make it. He was cut later on, but he got to the point where there was a lot of like one-on-ones, and let's just say it was very uncomfortable and a lot of just these kids are just not the same. So I can tell you from a personal story that someone told me,
Mhm.
direct interaction with the P Diddy Puff Daddy, you know, Lula stuff, without getting into too much into it. But I- you know, of course, right now he's innocent until proven guilty. But
Whatever. He's not
this man is
innocent.
guilty as
He's not.
hell.
Yeah,
Okay,
he's not.
there's not even
And some
a
of us been
bone in my
waiting for
body.
years.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
some of us been waiting for years.
Oh,
It's just like this is the result that of you think you can mess again with a Zionist when they're in way more power. And this is again when people tell you who they are, you better believe them. There was so much where he incriminated himself over the years and people wouldn't see it. There's so many rumors and so many other testimonies by people, and there is video evidence of him acting weird and people didn't want to see it. And this is the thing. He thought that he can mess with these big corporations because they gave him money, they gave him a car, they gave him a status. And I do believe when he sued that company that he had a contract with, where this, I forgot what they're called. I think it's a UK based company, when they did this liquor thing together. What was it called? Does
Was
anyone
that the
know?
Ciroc?
Yeah, but he
oh,
was doing,
Ciroc.
no, it was the other one. He was doing, how can I
Because
forget
that threw
about?
me off. I'm like,
It's
Ciroc's
because
not UK.
no, I don't know these things, right? And to be honest, I didn't care enough, but it's like,
Yeah,
is it
yeah.
did he have a tequila or something like that? Did he have like some other thing, or I don't know, or some other type of alcohol? I don't know what it was, but
Mhm.
it was with a different company. And then he wanted
Mhm.
to sue them because he said that he was making all the money, and it was kind of like a weird thing. And then after that, strangely, this whole thing started blowing up, and people believe it started with Cassie, but who knows if Cassie was just not an instrument, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Did you guys see that video, the Cassie video?
that was,
Oh, yeah.
It's horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I mean, domestic violence is, it's everywhere. It's
mm,
just seeing that, honestly, like on that scale, like the kicking and the bang, like the slapping
Mhm.
and the punch, like as a woman, holy crap. First of all, I'll be calling my mom and my sisters and my brother. Like this man would not be alive.
oh,
For legal purposes, I'm kidding, but you know what I mean. Like I'm just at this point, like I cannot believe she stayed silent that long.
no,
I just
no,
can't.
no, but
That's actually
she
like,
was not herself though. Like
it's very
she,
common in
yeah.
domestic violence
Hmm.
situations. They're often emotionally abused before the physical even happens. They're isolated. They feel like they have no one. So it's very common for victims of domestic violence to not even tell people that they're very close with,
Hmm.
and for it to go on for years before they speak up.
I
Yeah.
do think that she told. I think that people saw, I mean, we actually saw her getting away from him, getting with Kid Cudi, and his car
Mhm.
being blown up next. So we did see that she was trying to remove herself from the situation. But when you have these powerful people who have endless money and therefore access to endless, people to execute certain jobs for them, it's very hard to get away.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. That too.
Agreed.
Okay, so of course we have the election. We have Biden stepping down, endorsing Kamala.
Mhm.
Is it Kamala or Kamala?
Kamala, maybe.
I heard,
No,
I hear it being said
this.
Kamala.
Okay, Kamala.
Yeah.
I never get it right. Never. Okay, so endorsing Kamala. She never made it. Trump made it. Where is this going?
Well, I mean, have you guys seen the Twitter fights lately in the MAGA
I've seen a
community? I don't
few.
know. Like a lot of things have been happening that I mean, I'm surprised. It feels like MAGA is falling apart before he even takes office. And he feels more like a leftist than, than anything right now. I don't even know. I don't
I
even know how to
love
describe
it. This is like a real comedy show.
it.
It's really a comedy show.
When I was reading the tweets, I was like, is this real life? That's all I kept thinking. I'm like, these are political leaders or people that are, even if Elon Musk is not necessarily in politics, he definitely has an influence on
Well, he paid for
politics.
it.
Yeah. So that was crazy to me. But I guess we're like on a wait and see.
Yeah.
I
It's gonna,
knew. Oh,
I was gonna say a name.
oh yeah, I was gonna say I had a bad feeling that Trump was going to win the election just because it was 50-50, and I knew just as a kind of political scientist in my civilian career and as an undergrad, I specialized in American politics. So I'm looking at the polls, and I know it's the popular vote's not what determines the election. It's the electoral college. So you look at the swing states. Now, whoever does win, the national popular vote does usually win the election. It's only 5 times in history where that hasn't been the case, where somebody lost the popular vote, yet still won the election. Um, but anyway, the polls are 50-50 nationally, with about a 3% margin of error, roughly. So for the results to turn out as they did, the polls were as accurate as they could have been. But the key was to look at the toss-up states. Now, in Arizona and in Nevada, which is surprising, Republicans haven't picked up Nevada in I think about 20 years. It's been a while, but they made up a lot of ground in Nevada and in Arizona. I knew Trump was going to take back Georgia. I knew he would keep North Carolina. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan were the 3 states that I thought were going to decide the election. And I thought, okay, with Biden dropping out, because Pennsylvania is his home state, that home field advantage he'd have there, I thought, okay, that's gone now. So I thought Trump might actually, he got his ears shot in Pennsylvania. So I thought that might be the dumbest reason in the world to vote for him. But well, people voting for Trump, it's usually not for smart reasons. So, okay, he actually he's probably going to pick up Pennsylvania now because of his ear getting shot and his supporters put little flags in their ears and stuff. Anyway, so I thought he's got Pennsylvania now. But then I thought Michigan and Wisconsin, I thought he was going to win. I'm like, there's no way because it's 50-50 in both states. Polls were extremely back and forth. And I thought there's no way he's going to lose both of those states. I just couldn't see it happening. But I didn't think he was going to win all 3 of them and then also pick up Arizona and also pick up Nevada. And like that was what blew my mind. I'm like, how did he pick up every single toss-up state? I mean, that's what like shook me. I was just like, there's just no freaking way. Like I said, I figured he was going to win. I didn't think it'd be by that much of a margin. And again, popular vote wise, he only won by 1.5% of the margin, which is again within that 3% margin of error. So the polling was as accurate as it could have been, but I was surprised by the electoral college outcome. But regardless, in terms of the implications of that, it's going to be a clown car. It's already shaping up to be one, like nominating Matt Gaetz, a known sex offender and sex trafficker, to be the attorney general. Like he thought that was a good idea. And so, sure, and to an extent, he's entertaining. I'll give him that. But at the same time, in terms of being a policymaker and specifically a politician, not enthusiastic about him. Specifically, going back to Palestine, he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He funneled all sorts of aircraft and missiles to Israel. He has what he recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel. He had a town, I believe, and the occupied part of the Golan Heights, or a street or something like that was named after him. So that's a troubling development. He still funneled weapons to Saudi Arabia, to the government of Nigeria, as they crack down on Biafran separatists. He has, and then specifically too, the Emirates were also part of the bombing of Yemen, as was Saudi Arabia during his first tenure. So no regard for human rights. One of the first things he did too is the executive order allowing the Army Corps of Engineers to bulldoze the Dakota Access Pipeline against the protests of the Standing Rock Sioux. So anti-indigenous on top of that. Don't even have to go into his immigration policy and these promises of mass deportation that he's not going to be able to carry out, but that won't stop him from trying. There's a whole laundry list of crap that can continue regarding his tenure. So the only silver lining to him is that he is a wild card. He is known for being very petty. So if he does, for example, stop supporting, say, Israel, Saudi Arabia, it'll be for the dumbest reason in the world. And it'll be a very serendipitous occurrence. It'll be like, him and Netanyahu got into an argument over the color of his tie, or, something really stupid. And that would be the only reason he'd do something petty in retaliation. But that's basically it. And it's kind of like the fate of the world seems to be in the tiny hands of an orange buffoon who looks like he's covered in cheese whiz. I mean, that's he was like, how is this even real? But this is what people voted for, and they did it largely out of spite for the Democratic Party. And sure, the Democratic Party sucks. I'm not denying that. But I just keep thinking, how do we keep making the same mistakes? And it turns out most people voted just based on the state of the economy. For most Americans, it's all they really care about. That's what tends to predict electoral outcomes. So people are saying, oh, inflation was out of control under Biden. We got to vote for Trump because prices were so much lower. And for the sake of time, the point is no president wants the economy to suck. It's not like the president waves a magic wand that makes the economy good or brings inflation down or something like that. That's not how it works. Yeah. Economics is significantly more complicated than anything the president directly does. So that's the way people vote, and that's what we have to live with, unfortunately.
I think that's so important, Iskander, what you touched on, because a lot of people cite, oh, well, there were no wars going on in the Middle East when Donald Jessica Trump was in office. I call him that as a joke. But I really do appreciate, because there actually were so many things going on. We just were not maybe aware of it. They weren't being reported. It was more clandestine. It wasn't necessarily sending so many troops over, right? Like how we're used to seeing deployment for war. So I really appreciate you touching on that, because I think it's something people don't even realize. And they're like, oh, well, he brought peace. Peace to who? Peace to who is the question. And they always cite what they call historic peace deals with other Middle Eastern countries, which is also not wrong. Morocco's North African. Let's not forget that. But they're saying like, oh, Israel and North Africa, or Morocco and North Africa normalized. Okay, but they didn't have any, they're not subjugating Moroccans. They're subjugating Palestinians. And it's not a historic peace deal, because we have already presidents in the past do peace deals with Egypt and Jordan. So I like having some context and being in reality. That's what I just wanted to touch on. I really appreciate you mentioning that, Iskander, because it wasn't peace in the Middle East under Trump.
Continue with the topic of U.S. presence. We have a breaking news, Iskander. You put it first in the chat. You want to say it?
Jimmy Carter just died as we were speaking.
Jimmy Carter.
Oh.
He was the 39th president of the United States. Yeah. He died. And so, he was 100 years old. I mean, he lived a very long life. And again, it would require a completely separate panel for him. He, generally speaking, is not regarded as a particularly great president by many historians. I think he was underrated. I think he was a good man. He had a big heart. He inherited a mess when he was president, and stagflation, the Yom Kippur War. And many attack him over Camp David and say, oh, he dared to normalize, make peace with the Egyptians and the Zionists. And though that might be true, Jimmy Carter was always trying to act in good faith, and his diplomatic efforts extended long beyond his presidency. He wrote a whole book. He even met with Hamas leadership long after his presidency was over, clear into 2008. For example, he met with Khalid Mashal, who's now once again the chief of the Hamas Politburo. And so, anyway, he wrote a whole book called Peace Not Apartheid. I've read it. It's a great read, a very nuanced and balanced perspective, and certainly something he can appeal, certainly to those demographics in the South that would otherwise be totally pro-Zionist, generally. And yet he, being from Georgia, he was a little peanut farmer who just wanted to enter into politics, served in World War II, graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. It was kind of a dark horse candidate to become the president after he was the governor of Georgia. And, well, he won in an upset largely because everyone hated Gerald Ford for pardoning Richard Nixon amidst the Watergate scandal. And, well, same thing with like Iran. People attack him. Oh, he should have kept supporting the Shah, who was a murderous dictator. And he said, no, the Shah has a horrendous human rights record. I don't like him. The Shah was sick and injured. He's like, oh, but I still can't let him suffer and die. I took him in. The IRGC responded by taking the Iranian hostages. Jimmy Carter responded with Operation Eagle Claw, which is a disaster, and stuff like that is what plagued Jimmy Carter's presidency. That stagflation, the oil glut, Iran, for example, cutting off the oil to the U.S. The U.S. at the time didn't have as much domestic oil as it does now. So he got hit with that. The price controls he put in place led to oil shortages in the late 70s, for those who may be old enough to remember that. And, my father, for example, remembers those days. And anyway, so that summarized much of his presidency. But again, his post-presidency, his diplomatic efforts continued, and the Carter Foundation is still alive and well in Atlanta, Georgia today. So
Yeah, his biggest legacy is a Habitat for Humanity. He literally built houses for homeless people. So
Yeah, no
rest
wonder
in
they
peace.
called him underrated. So yeah, thanks for the breaking news. Iskander, thanks for mentioning it. Maria, that said, we definitely went over time. Do we have any closing comments?
Yeah, I want to mention one thing before we close. On October 16, yeah, I don't want to say it wrong. Jawad Sinwar, leader of the resistance group, was gunned down by the Israelis occupation, and he was down fighting in the battlefield.
Yeah.
And he fought until the last moment. We saw it, and I just want to mention that before we close. He died fighting for his people.
100%.
Regardless of any personal opinion that anybody else has, he was in the battlefield. He was not in the tunnels. He was not running. He was there, and he fought until the very last moment.
Yes.
That's all they wanted to say.
Well, we did mention Sinwar before, but we didn't go into details because, again, time. But thank you for mentioning it because it is important. It's definitely one of the biggest rumors. And as I always said, Hollywood couldn't have written a better script for a superhero.
If you don't mind, I don't want to go into detail because we don't have time, but I just want to mention some of the important court cases that we didn't get a chance to touch on. So we have the ICJ. They have Nicaragua versus Germany. Nicaragua is actually suing Germany for its material support of Israel and committing its war crimes. And then in the U.S., we have some U.S. citizens that happen to either be related to or they are survivors of Nova. They are suing AMP and the National SJP for materially supporting theism. This is again just another
terrorism for those who don't know.
Yeah, just another way of them trying to stifling the First Amendment and trying to attack the college students, which again throughout this year they really stepped up in their protests. They also filed a lawsuit against AP News for the same thing, materially supporting terrorism. And then the more important one to me is that, well, I love First Amendment stuff, so that's important to me too, but more unprecedented, there is a lawsuit against the U.S. State Department and Antony Blinken that was filed December 17th, and it's alleging our continued funding to the Israeli military is in violation of the Leahy law. So I'm really interested in following up with these cases, and I just wanted to make sure we at least mentioned that there are other cases out there.
Yes.
Oh,
and we don't forget that also the prime minister of the occupation is a arrest warrant for him. There was issued this year.
Yeah, we talked about that, but sorry, last one, July 19th, 2024, the ICJ issued its ruling about annexation, and they essentially found that Israel is no longer in occupation. They're actually committing annexation, and they made an official decision that Gaza has been under occupation since 1967, which changes the whole landscape, right? Every time they say Israel has a right to self-defense, they actually do not under international law. So I just wanted to make that known as well.
Ray, do you have any closing statement?
No, I was actually reading the comment that Nada put about the rumor that Netanyahu has a prostate cancer. I was just about to mention that one because I read it on one of the Telegram news channels as well.
Well, too bad that it can be healed. That's one of the
Or can be
easiest cancers.
fatal. Or
No, well,
can be fatal.
it's one of the easiest cancers to heal, shamefully, in this case.
Mm. Okay. So this was great. That was amazing. So much information. Thank you, guys. You are amazing.
Nada, do you have a statement?
No, just thank you for hosting this. I think you're just summarizing the year. It really just reading the list, it made me realize how much I've forgotten, sadly, just because it's like, as news is unfolding from Gaza every day and then
Yes.
just around the world, you really forget that all of this stuff happened. I mean, some things, stick in your mind, but you're just like, holy crap, like, for example, the earthquake in Japan, I had it completely, it's not even in my mind, really. And it sucks that there's just so much turmoil around the world. But I would say, maybe to leave it on a positive note. I mean, from a personal perspective, I lost my dad this year. So on top of all of this, I personally experienced the loss. But to leave things on a high note, honestly, just as long as we all remember that, there's a lot of good to live for and a lot of good that's happening around the world, like these conversations that we're having. And the solidarity that I'm seeing, I have never thought that I would ever see in my lifetime. So I'm proud of people that are coming together and we're trying to do the best we can, obviously, and just to love each other the best way that we can. So I'm definitely proud there of the people that are involved.
Perfect. That's it. Well said. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope you guys remembered some of the stuff, because it was a lot and we didn't mention anything. I know there's going to be a lot of why not this and why not that. We don't have time. We already like over time. So thanks for tuning in, and bye-bye.